Hi, everybody. This is Ann Delano Steinert. I'm here from the Over the Rhine Museum. Welcome to our second installment of virtual 3 Acts in Over the Rhine. As many of you know, our 3 Acts program is a quarterly lecture series where we pull together 3 stories from all aspects of Over the Rhine's history. The idea is to help us tell all the stories that Over the Rhine has to tell. So this is going to be the first talk in our second on digital virtual 3 Acts. So today we're going to learn a little bit about the world of work in Over the Rhine. One of the things we tend to imagine that big factories were a 19th century part of Over the Rhine life, breweries and pork packing. But what we're going to find out tonight is that actually industry and commerce were a big part of Over the Rhine even until the recent past. So I'm here tonight with Jay Schuermann. Jay's the president and founder of EOE Furniture. He's a 4th generation German-American entrepreneur with a 150-year family heritage of work in Over the Rhine. So Jay's going to share his family business history, including ownership of one of Cincinnati's largest cigar makers, the Burning Cigars, which was the factory was located on 12th Street, and then Vienna Brewing, who had their brewery on Reading Road. Schuermann's family also ran a bar, a packing house, 3 distribution warehouses, and an office in Over the Rhine throughout their long history there. Jay's gonna walk us through some of his family history, and then he's gonna introduce his dad, multifaceted Cincinnati businessman A.F. Schuermann, and he's gonna share some then and now images of buildings that housed his family's businesses and discuss how the businesses and the buildings have changed over time. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jay. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so we can go through Jay's slides. Here we go. Let me get this started for you, Jay. Okay, and without further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to Jay. Thank you for being here with us. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm excited to be doing this. As I have mentioned to you in the past, I am the romanticist in the family, and I'm the last of my generation on both sides at age 70. So I dig into quite a bit of our history, and I'm very fond. I love Cincinnati. It's a wonderful city. But it all started back in the mid to late 1800s with my maternal great-grandfather, Henry Burning, born in 1843, and his 4 brothers who owned Burning Cigar. Here you can see his monument. So as I have mentioned, he must have done pretty well because that's actually a life-size statue that you're seeing there.
Wow. And where is the monument?
It's in St. Mary's. If you'll go to the next slide. He was buried in St. Mary's in 1904. Next. We're going to kind of jump forward to my father, A.F. Schuermann, then go back. This is my dad in 1947. At his first office, just an office, on West 12th Street. Next. This is what the building looks like now, and he had one of the small storefronts on the first floor.
I lived in that building for a while, Jay. That's an amazing building.
Yeah, next. This is a drawing of his first warehouse in 1951. It's it's almost at Main Street on 12th. He paid $7,000 for it. It was built as a monument company and had an elevator that was operated by a pulley and a rope that ran on a big loop from the basement to the 2nd floor. I always found that as a kid to be kind of interesting. Next. Today it's the R is R, a wine bar. Next. In 1962, we just moved a half a block down the street to 12th and Vine. Provident Bank had their branch office on the first floor before they moved to the Kroger building in 1957. It sat empty for 5 years. Dad bought the entire building for $25,000 and sold it 15 years later for $25,000 and was tickled to death that he sold it for that. All of the original teller cages when he had bought it and marble counters were there. Back in the day, the tellers were locked literally in a cage to deter anyone from robbing the bank, as the individual tellers could not get out out to get to the money from the walk-in safe that is still there today. The rest of the building was empty when my father bought it. It was originally built as a large woman's department store. Dad always laughed that it didn't have an elevator, which they should have put one in because their customers would be losing weight by walking up the 4 flights of stairs. The 4th floor was pretty much untouched from original days. I used to wander up there to take a look at it. It had a mezzanine that ran around the entire floor with open shelves for clothes to be stored. All the light fixtures were original, and you could almost feel the presence of past shoppers. During the riots in the late 60s, Dad was always concerned about all the glass windows along 12th Street would be an attractive hazard. Next, 8. Building looks a lot different today. Dad would be amazed at how it now looks. Last I saw, each floor was on the market for $180,000. Next. Kaufman Brewery Building was the next location for A.F. Schuermann Company, 1978 at Liberty and Vine, until Schuermann Company moved to Elmwood Place. At this point, the company was run by 2 brothers, Jim and Ron Schuermann. I remember seeing the bricked up opening in the sub-basement walls in 1978 that recently had been opened up to discover a passageway to the other brewery that was just east of the Kaufman Brewery. The building even has an architectural frieze of hops and vines running at the 2nd floor level across the front of the building, a sign of what went on inside at one time. Today, it's the Guild House. Next. Next in line was my maternal grandfather, who was married to Henry Burning's daughter, Clara. Henry Mullering was a city councilman for 1 term when he married Clara Burning and lived and worked in the bar and grocery store on 12th Street, which for many years was known as Neon's. Back then, just about every bar owner was a councilman. There were 30 councilmen when Henry was on city council. I think that's why he only stayed 1 year. Can you imagine? Prior to that, Henry worked directly for Barney Kroger and collected the money from Kroger's stores. He saw that Barney was doing well, so Henry decided to buy the bar and grocery store. Next. And this is a picture of it. His brother Charles ran the bar grocery store during Prohibition and was occasionally arrested and released. It was pretty much a common practice that officials looked the other way when it came to arresting bar owners. My grandfather also owned a pork packing company on Massachusetts Avenue. They were growing during the 1920s, and Henry wanted to buy Kroger's old packing plant, as they had moved to a larger one. Henry spoke to Barney and said, "We want to buy it, but we don't know how we're going to pay for the building." Barney said, "Henry, don't worry about it. I know you'll take care of it." So it was purchased on a handshake. Today, it would have been tons of paperwork and attorneys involved. Next. After Prohibition, Henry Mullering founded Vienna Brewery with Albont Sr. Next. They occupied the old Gambrinus brewery stables for the bottling plant and built next an office building next to it. Way too elaborate and costly. And even though Vienna was the first one that bottled beer in quart bottles and were generating a profit from operations, the debt from the office building forced them into bankruptcy. Albon's got out earlier, and today his grandson Albon's III runs Heidelberg Distributing, which he still considers their roots in Vienna Brewery. Next. Burning Cigar actually started on Main Street, just south of 4th on the west side. Next. You'll see in the next 3 slides, Burning hand-wrapped their cigars. Eyebold Cigar machine made their cigars. There was always a big battle over which one was best. Next.
So I'm taken by how many of these cigar rollers seem to be women.
I think so.
Interesting.
And there was always a discussion about they were germ infested if they were rolled by hand and eyeballed, and they just felt, hand rolled was more
Yeah.
was better, was, you know, kind of like hand making of anything.
Yeah.
Here they tobacco. In the next picture, I'm guessing this is my, in the next picture, I'm guessing this is my great grandfather and his brothers. Next. In the mid 20s, you can see Burning Place is still there, but in the mid 20s, Cincinnati Gas and Electric bought Burning Cigar Building and others and built the CG&E building, now Duke Building on 4th and Main. But as you can see, Burning Place is still there. Next, it was an alley that ran behind their building. In case you want to shortcut to 3rd Street, here you go. Next. They then constructed the building on 12th Street, but the company probably closed in the late 30s. Family folklore has it that there was a bad batch of tobacco with weevils in it, and they had no idea. They made the cigars, and when their customers opened the cigar boxes, they found the cigars full of holes. Logic tells us that they lost out to Eyebold, who machine made their cigars. Eyebold was huge back in the day. And this is, when I say back in the day, back probably 40, 50 years ago. The ancestors of Eyebold, the Burgers, lived on a huge estate on Shawnee Run in Indian Hill. The Burnings didn't. The cigar business was kind of like TV manufacturing from the 60s. RCA touted circuit board technology, and Zenith promoted handmade craftsmanship where they manually soldered each connection, if you can imagine. Zenith has been gone for probably 60 years. RCA may still be around. In the mid-50s to at least the 60s, the building was occupied by American Case and Luggage. They were a dealer and distributor for all kinds of luggage, including American Tourister, which is very big in the day. They not only sold luggage, but they had contracts to repair luggage that was damaged by airlines. Needless to say, there's been major changes in OTR over the past 100 years. My father, Al Schuermann, who was actually born in Over the Rhine, would be blown away to see how upscale the place of his birth and where he spent most of his working career has become. As I had mentioned, I'm the romanticist in the family, so I take a great interest in my heritage and in Cincinnati and in Over the Rhine. My roots actually go back to 1830s in the area when other German ancestors passed through Cincinnati to stake out their farm in Northwest Ohio, only returned to Cincinnati in the early 1900s. So as I say, even though I'm only a second generation removed from the farm, there are obviously a number of entrepreneurs mixed in that were part of the OTR.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. Jay, like beyond having that picture of the building I lived in, we actually include so many of these places. We walk past them on our walking tour. So we do actually, the Over the Rhine Museum's Tenement Life South of Liberty walking tour actually stops at the Burning Cigar Building and talks about burning. In particular, we make this point that what I said at the beginning, that we tend to think of Over the Rhine as mostly residential and small shops, but that actually it was a place of bustling factories and manufacturing too. And we sort of think of that's in the very distant past, but it's actually, as you know, right, it really recent in a lot of ways.
That's right. So do you have any other?
Yeah, well, I do. Of course I do. So first, I'm curious about your dad being born over the Rhine, and whether did he have stories that he shared about what life was like in Over the Rhine, like when he was a kid, or growing up in his family businesses?
Well, probably, you know, what that he did talk about is that actually when his mother was expecting, they lived in Mount Auburn in a rental property, but there was some kind of influenza going on, and not like the big one in 19, he was born in 13. So he moved in with her mother, who lived on 13th Street over near St. Paul's. So he talks about being born over there. So when we would be driving home from work, we would go over that way and he'd point out the house. He also pointed out the backside of where Vienna Brewery was. It said, you know, that's where Vienna Brewery was, and I didn't really pay that much attention, but he mentioned that. But he didn't have too many stories other than he saw the area as being a very affordable place in which to run a business. Because in those days, and we're talking in the 50s and in the 60s, you could buy property very inexpensively, as I had mentioned. And he was German. So it was also very convenient because he distributed products to hardware stores and paint stores in the three-state area. It was very convenient for the truckers to stop by and pick up multiple times a day, as opposed to being out in the suburbs. You'd be lucky if it was every other day. So that was.
So interesting. So did he employ folks from the Over the Rhine neighborhood, or who worked for him in the factory? Where were they coming from?
They were mostly, well, there weren't that many people. There was probably maybe about 4 or 5 or 6.
Oh, okay.
Many were college students that worked part-time. There were a number of women that lived on the, down in Addiston. And he had a bookkeeper. I'm not sure where she lived, but a typist that she typed up all the orders, and she lived not in Over the Rhine. Over the Rhine was mostly white Appalachian in those days, and they weren't technical. Not that the people that were making paint rollers were, but obviously, his office staff was a little different. He was a small entrepreneur, but he was very proud of what he had accomplished.
So did you ever work in the business, or what's your relationship? Would you just, stop in and hang around when you were in high school or anything?
I'm the youngest of 5. From the time each of us, I'm trying to remember, probably by the time we were freshmen in high school, we all worked down there during the summer. We all worked there over Christmas break, which wasn't all that long. Easter we didn't, because you only got 2 days off. But yeah, when I worked there, it was at 12th and Main, and my grandfather, who had retired from the card plant, my dad's father, he worked in the plant. He was maintenance supervisor. He kind of ran the little manufacturing floor on the 3rd floor. So I would stand in the corner on the 3rd floor, and I would make paint rollers. And this was not air conditioned. So it was a little warm in August.
Right.
But we would get big rolls of polyethylene, and we would have to roll them off into sections that could be folded up and stuffed as 9x12s into a bag and sealed and put into boxes. And my brothers we would all have kind of a test to see who could do the most in the shortest period of time. So we were all kind of goal driven even then. So was it fun? Not really, but it was a job, so it was fun.
Yeah, and it also must be cool to look back and feel like you've been connected to Over the Rhine for so much of your life, so that you have these memories that are, from the 50s and 60s of being in this place that now is drastically transformed.
Right, and it's been fun because we went to the R wine bar, and we actually went down there with my parents. What would have been their 80th anniversary was on a Friday night, so we went down there and had pictures from their wedding party, kind of a party down there. And we asked them if they could take us around, which they did. It doesn't look anything like it did then. The rope elevator is still there, but it's not used.
Wow, it's amazing. So in your experience and learning about your family, what do you think made Over the Rhine such a good place for these businesses? Are there characteristics of the neighborhood that you think make it a great place for work?
Well, I think at the time, back in the 50s and 60s, as I had mentioned, space was pretty inexpensive. Transportation was, trucking was very available multiple times during the day. There was, next to Dad's building was Pop's Bedding. They made mattresses. And I could remember Dad would go over and say, "Hey, I need a couple mattresses. Do you have any samples you're looking to get rid of?" And across the street from that was a company, and I don't remember the name of it, but they were a distributor for kitchen cabinets. And if you remember back in the 50s, everybody was putting in metal kitchen cabinets.
Sure.
Old enough, I am. And
I love metal kitchen cabinets.
Yeah. Then around the corner from them was, Dorschers candy.
Yep.
Make that think like and they were there for like generations. There used to be a store down there that at Easter time, Dad would bring home ducks, the little chicks. So,
They
you know,
make the French chews, and then they do candy canes at Christmas time. We actually
yeah,
had Doshers do a 3X for us a couple years ago around Christmas time.
yes, and they're now, I think, out in Newtown. But
Correct.
there used to be where the color building is, there
Mhm.
used to be a hardware store there that my dad used to call on. And I could remember Dad said, you know, we need some 8-foot long fluorescent tubes. And I said, you want me to walk from up there with carrying 8-foot fluorescent tubes through this neighborhood? I mean, I'm going to feel like a moving target. Well, I made it.
Awesome. So, do you like, so, you know, today there aren't really factories in Over the Rhine. I mean, I guess Rheingeist is making beer still, but can you imagine an Over the Rhine today that would involve manufacturing? Does it seem like a place where that could happen again, or do you think that we're past that?
I think the property is too expensive and it is
Oh yeah.
used. And also, it's a place for young urbans, young urban professional. Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe even the 80s, loft apartments were not very popular. Now they're very popular, very trendy. You can make a lot of money if you do it well. Matter of fact, my cousins, my cousin Roger Mullering, his wife and son, I think, own property in Over the Rhine that they have renovated, but I haven't talked to them in a long time.
Well, maybe you can send him this video.
Yes.
Well, that's all the questions I really have. Anything you want to, any final thoughts?
The only thing I have to say is that, you know, I have lived in Cincinnati virtually all of my 70 years, lived in Columbus for a short time, Dayton for 14 years. Cincinnati is an amazing place. The topography, the beauty of the natural beauty, architecturally, I was on the Architectural Foundation board for 9 years, president for 3 years, and I just love the city. It's got so much charm, and the way it has come back is just, I mean, you know, it's interesting. My parents back in the 60s, maybe the 70s, were very proud of Cincinnati. And it went through a real kind of a low self-image for probably about 30 years. And now it's back up on top. And it's just great. It's a great place for people of all generations to live. And also, as we all always tout, even though the Over the Rhine is a little bit more expensive, there are still very nice, charming places to live that are very affordable in comparison to other larger cities.
And Over the Rhine is about to get a great new cultural institution in the form of the Over the Rhine Museum.
That's great.
If you would like to donate, if you're watching this video and you'd like to donate, please go to our website, otrmuseum.org. There'll be a donate link right up at the top, and we would love your support. We are excited to keep bringing great programming like this and to help people learn more and more about all the stories from all the generations that Over the Rhine has to tell. Come back next week. We're going to be hosting Tracy L. Wilson, who is the outreach coordinator for the Cincinnati Opera. And so we're going to learn about all the community engagement activities over the years that she's been involved with the Cincinnati Opera. So for tonight, I just want to thank Jay Schuermann. Thank you so much for your great family stories. I really appreciate you sharing, your willingness to share.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much.